I was struck last week at the Harvard commencement, Oprah Winfrey said she had interviewed probably, I think she said 26,000 people. And she said when the lights go off and the cameras are off, she said every single one of them, presidents or whatever, asked the same question: how'd I do? So I thought I'd use this time to think about a little bit, how are we doing? I mean, we've been through an amazing period over the last 20 years that I felt quite privileged to be part of. And we've come so many different ways. So I'm going to use 3 words, see if I can stick to that. Perception, disease, and movement. So perception. I had a neighbor, Ray. And Ray was a plumber, maybe about 75 years old. His father had been called into school when he was in the 6th grade and said, Mr. Grenier, I think you probably should take Ray out. I don't think he's cut out for this world, and find him something to do. So Ray became a plumber and became a very successful plumber in this small little town. So one day Ray came out and said to me, we were doing something around the yard. He said, Brad, 3 secrets to a successful life. Number 1, a generator. Number 2, a sump pump. And number 3, a good wife. And then he added, in that order. Well, I sort of gasped a little bit, but later on I began to, again, to look at this perception, because how many times have I been to companies? What's their secret for success? Profits, number 1. Number 2, market share. Number 3, good employees. In that order. So I think this notion of perception is sort of an interesting one. Having recently retired, I have a somewhat different perception now of where we're coming and where we're going. And I'm quite interested in trying to look at the expanse of where we are and where we're going. So I think of my own journey that started out really about in the field of alcoholism and industry, broadened to a sort of a broader employee assistance program until someone said, oh, you should really think about single parents, which I had never even thought about. So that sort of merged and brought in a whole notion of starting a center on work and family. And then that too began to get, for me, just a little too stale. And I began to look at that issue of it takes a village and moved into the area of corporate responsibility and began to see work life in a very different perspective of the responsibilities of the corporation or the nature of the corporation. And then more recently have been involved in sort of innovation and social entrepreneurship, again, looking at work life in quite a different way. But through all of this, we can start to see an amazing story that's happened. And I think this first phase, as I would see it, of work life and work family, has been an unfolding of stories and an unfolding of perceptions. So we have some amazing, what started out as sort of the concern about working women, as we've heard already today, has sort of merged into working men, fathers as well as parents. We've seen really some amazing opening up. And so in some ways, this is like an aperture, and we keep broadening that aperture. And as it broadens, it gets more complicated. And again, I get back to sort of Ray's thing of, well, what's our measures of success? How do we know when we're going to reach success? So, perception, disease. In the midst of all of this sort of journey, I'm also observing, and we've heard a little bit of this afternoon, that we're continuing to sort of see things coming back again. Some of the issues are sort of the same in different clothing, but some of these issues are just very persistent issues that we don't seem to have really made a breakthrough in many ways of some of the most basic issues as we think about sort of work family. So I think of this as a disease, a dis-ease. We have an unease about the fact that with all that we've been able to do, we still haven't got to the nub of this. We still haven't really opened this up in a way that we felt, okay, we've finally gotten over this hump. And so as I've particularly been doing work in the area of corporate responsibility and sustainability, it occurs to me that we're all sort of bumping up against a dominant sort of overlay here. Call it what you want, global capitalism, whatever it is. That clearly, capitalism has really developed an amazing array of benefits and prosperity for us, but it's also creating some unintended issues, some externalities that we haven't been able to incorporate. So one of the issues of this disease, this lack of fit between our sort of broad economic system and our attempt to find some balance or some less stressful lives, or whatever we might want to call it in the work-life field, continues to gnaw away at us. So this disease leads to change. And one of the things that I begin to think is the third area, which I want to talk about, which is movement. So we have an interesting time now where we're thinking, is work-life really a movement? Have we really accomplished what we would think about as a movement? Well, I've studied movements enough to know that there are some elements of this, but by and large, we're still sort of stuck in stories. We're still stuck in sort of individual, and we haven't really scaled this up the way a movement has. But there's a whole issue around movements, I think, that we have to begin to think about. And again, I don't necessarily see as much promise in the work-life field as I see outside of it, which is a great opportunity for work-life. Outside of it, we're seeing a lot of this disease manifest in different things. So for example, let me see if I can, the B Corporation, sustainability, conscious capitalism. When I first heard these things, I said, The more I've gotten into them, I say, So going from to is a pretty big jump, at least for me. So here's the B Corporation, which is basically saying, let's get state legislators to redefine how corporations legally are not just holding to profits, but can really try and make social impact. So you have a whole group of companies now that are sort of moving in this direction. The sustainability movement is probably as close as we have to an ongoing movement as we would sort of see it, where people are mobilizing around some pretty serious issues around this. And then I think we have John Mackey from Whole Foods going around the country with a campaign on conscious capitalism. Again, the same theme. So in some ways, I think we're moving to a very interesting point now where change is bubbling up from the bottom. The Arab Spring, the Occupy Wall Street, we're beginning to see this with the social media, the Twitters, et cetera. It's coming from the bottom up. Partly in frustration to the institutions that are not serving us well and are unable to change very easily, but partly because that's where ultimately sustainable change comes from. So the opportunity we have here is to really craft a new generation and a new stage of work life. So in closing, I felt incredibly privileged to be part of an amazing movement that's been going on. An incredible time where we've seen so many things happen, but I think in some ways the best is in front of us. Thank you.